But we have a guest. We have a guest. Let me get this straight. First, this, and this. The man of the hour, Mark Frost. How you doing, Mark? You doing all right this morning? Wait, Mark, I can't hear you, Mark. Is your mic on by chance, or are you muted?
Okay. Now you can hear me.
There you are. There you are. How you doing this morning? You doing okay?
Doing really good. I got Shumpy in my lap and everything's good.
Shumpy in my lap and everything is good. Good. I'm glad that you can join me.
There you go. Man. You got to say hi to Shumpy.
My mom is going to be terrified. She's going to leave this screen. She's terrified of cats. I'm glad you could join me, Mark. I when you sent me the message and you were saying basically this is insane game theory being played out effectively, in a paraphrasing, with the world at stake. And it's like when you think about that, you think to yourself, yeah, that's effectively what's happening. I mean, did you ever read the book Three Body Problem?
No, I haven't, but I've heard about it. Yes.
Oh, the book is astonishingly good. Like, especially when you get to Dark Force and when you get into Death's End.
Oh, wow.
2/3 of Death's End. The book is astonishing. The imagination in the book is mind-blowing. But there's
add that to my queue.
Okay, so there's an element in the book called the sword holder. And the sword holder is what they use in order to stop the aliens from attacking Earth. Basically, he was the guy that was holding an instrument that would allow him to destroy two worlds, our world and their world. And the thing that made it work is that if he was willing to kill everybody, meaning destroy both worlds, you couldn't touch him. And so he was bulletproof. You couldn't touch him. You couldn't do anything to him because there was the belief that he would end it all. And because they were gauging his, would he do it or not? It was hovering around 90 to 95%. So at any moment, at 90 to 95% certainty, he would eliminate both worlds if any move was made on Earth. All right. That is effectively what's happening, right? Like Joe Biden, Putin, these guys are sword holders. And the thought is, if we fully believe that these people would attack us, or if they fully believe that Putin is not bluffing, then it on some level stays their hand because they don't necessarily want the end of the world. At least I don't think they do. But if they believe there's any doubt, if there's a sliver of doubt,
right,
then it eggs them on. They're more than willing to go into it, which could, again, still lead to nuclear oblivion. If there's a 40% chance, there's a 40% chance. And that's effectively what happens in the book. They give it to somebody who didn't have that gumption to say, screw it, I'm going to kill everybody. And so she couldn't press the button when it came time to press the button. And so they attacked because she didn't have it in her. I guess I'm saying what it comes across as is these people with nuclear weapons, especially with stockpile the size of the US, or for that matter, Russia, are sword holders. And they can literally end the world. And if one of the other leaders believes that they're weak, if they believe that they may not do it, or they don't necessarily have the confidence that they're going to do it, then they're going to be more aggressive in their actions. Hence, the Oreshnik, to make it clear, we will end the world. Stop screwing with us every bit as much as the U.S. would end the world if our borders were being attacked. Give me your take on this, because you're right, it's insane. I mean, when they're talking to Keir Starmer and they ask him point blank, hey, they're threatening nuclear war with Britain. Is Ukraine really worth that? And he's like, well, we have to keep fighting. It's just like, whoa. Whoa. Like, that's mind-blowing. And he's like, it's very important that we keep going and we have to fight and we have to, Putin was the aggressor. And it's like, okay, so it's important that we keep going, hefted against the world, existence itself. That's what you're comparing. These are apples and Jupiter. Like, it's just like so out of whack in what these guys are doing. Give me your take on this. Because I appreciated your text message when you sent it to me. And as you said, this was the thing you wanted to talk about. So give me your take on it.
Yeah, sure. This is an offshoot of the last time you had me on when we were talking about BRICS, and we kind of ran out of time. There's an entire game theory around BRICS. There's both benefits and costs to the people even advocating it. and nobody really wants it. But it seems to me like we're in our framework, we're painting the US dollar in a corner so that the participants of the world's economy have no choice but to at least entertain this and look at the possibilities. And often in psychology, when you speak something, it's like a couple that it's like psychologists say that the divorce, way before the actual divorce, the invisible divorce happens. It's when they speak it out the first time. Well, maybe we should just get a divorce. It makes it real. And it's always been sort of an unspoken rule in the Cold War, at least. You don't speak about it in the action sense. You allude to it, but you don't speak to it. But these people, what was the name of that rear admiral? I forgot his name.
Man,
he's saying, we're ready to go. We're ready to push the button. We're ready to do it, and we can outdo them. And that just got me thinking about, most people know that follow you and the old show and stuff like that I'm a mathematical economist. I'm a math guy. So if you just look at the mathematics of this and what's involved, it seems to be the hallmark of irrationality unless you posit particular values. And so let's do that. So let me take, if you don't mind, can I take 2 minutes just to set up a framework?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I'm looking for the clip just so people know what we're talking about. But yeah, please.
Sure. Play that clip now if you want.
Yeah, go ahead and explain. No.
Oh, okay, sure. So game theory is a mathematical, probabilistic way of trying to analyze group behavior given the expected behaviors of all of the various participants. It's used in economics on the business side in the case of oligopolies. So let's say you have Pepsi and Coke. Mm-hmm. So Pepsi and Coke advertise knowing that they're not really going to get much more market share, but they advertise because they know they know that their opponent is going to advertise. Right. The rational thing to do would be for the leader of Pepsi and the leader of Coke to get together in a smoke-filled room, so to speak, and just and then agree, we're not going to advertise. We'll keep the status quo as it is, and we won't advertise. We'll save all that money. And that would be the ideal solution. But what actually ends up happening is they both advertise, because even if they have a deal that they're not going to advertise, there are strong incentives in this for one of them to cheat. Because if they have a deal and they're not advertising, right, and Pepsi comes along and advertises and Coke doesn't, Pepsi gets market share. Right. So that's often called the Northwest corner solution in game theory, because we are painting an outcome that rational people are going to choose. It's rational to advertise. Why? Because I don't believe Pepsi's handshake with me that they won't advertise. Right. Well, let's take this in the nuclear war now. What is cheating when we're talking about, international, international thermonuclear war? Well, cheating, and pardon me, I'm going to put my brain into the brain of a neocon, like a Dick Cheney, or speaking of conflict, my cats are fighting. So I'm going to put this into a framework where let's look at cheating from the neocon's perspective. Is in nuclear war, everybody says you can't win a nuclear war. That's not true. We've already won a nuclear war. We won World War II. It was a nuclear war. It was really easy because we're the only ones that had them.
Right. So, right. It's not exactly the same, but I feel you.
Well, no, because this is very important, because in the mind of the neocon, here's the premise: war is inevitable. And remember, rarely do people make actual errors of logic. It's usually errors of premise. The premise these people have is war is absolutely inevitable. And because it's inevitable, the very nature of nuclear war favors those who strike first. The entire doctrine of the Cold War was the Soviet Union said, we'll be the last to use nuclear weapons. Right. It's always that way. we said, well, thank you very much. We will be the first.
Right.
That's so he who strikes first. And this is where I find it the whole paradigm to be immoral. But from the mind of a neocon, if war is inevitable, you might as well start thinking about winning whatever is inevitable. And the way you win it is you literally, in the mathematics and the equations, you're saying, okay, what if we could create a situation where there's an 80% chance we could take out 90% of their retaliatory capability, and we would lose 50 million, but they would lose the whole thing.
That's what they.
This is how they think. This is literally
the
mathematics of how they think, and I think it's important for everyone to recognize that these people are crazy, but they're rational. If that makes sense, given their premise. You know, if I was in an asylum and I want to watch myself bleed, there's been studies. People don't use butter knives; they go try to find sharp things if they like to watch themselves bleed. And neocons believe that war is inevitable. There's going to be casualties no matter what happens, and we might as well be the aggressors. We might as well fight the war in our terms on somebody else's turf, and if it means calling a bluff, so be it. And I think that they mean it when they say they're ready for nuclear war, because they view it as inevitable. And if war, if you were 100% convinced I was going to come over to your house and murder you and your children, the rational thing for you to do would be to want to murder me before I murdered you. Right. That's just the laws of rationality. And if you look at it from the mathematical perspective of if, then, else, which is all game theory is if Ukraine uses Western missiles in a direct way, and people have to remember what these latest missiles are. These aren't just firecrackers that you light a fuse and they go up. It requires coding. It requires some expertise that, let's just be honest, Ukraine doesn't have it.
Right.
So this isn't just a matter of us sending a weapon to a country and then they use it. That's borderline, but this is clearly acts of war.
Right.
And then just look at the game theory. For us, it's clear to me that what neocons are thinking is Ukraine is a golden opportunity for us to diminish Russia's resources. And all it really costs us is some risk of international prestige and some money.
Right.
But we're not really all that at risk from it. And so we can stick it to the Russians, and we don't really have to pay a large political price at home because U.S. boys are not coming home in body bags. But that's what I think that they're thinking. And then when you look at the actual mathematics of war, nuclear war absolutely favors the person who attacks first.
The thing is,
the person who attacks first can. There's even a name for it in the literature. It's called a decapitation strike.
Right.
If you can take them out to the point where it would be futile to even continue to fight back, you could negotiate a peace after it starts. And so this concept of a controlled nuclear war is the cornerstone of the neocon thinking in this. And this, so if you look at all the models, and there's all sorts of academic journals that are dedicated to this. So if you look at the mathematics of the journals, this is what they're banking on. They're banking on the fact that they believe Putin won't actually do it because he knows our stuff technically is better than their stuff, and we have more of it. It's better maintained, and they're willing to bet 20 to 50 million American lives on that, which I think is insane.
Mark, I can agree with. I agree with what you said to a point. No, I'll say this. I agree with what you said. The only thing I would quibble with is whether there's an honest assessment when those neocons are making those judgments. Like, for example, for them to say, well, we can take out 80%. Okay, is that true? Like, is that a Hitlerian thing of like the moment that we go into the Soviet Union, the whole thing will collapse? Is it that? Because ideological actors, I tend to not trust them in general, just because they're ideological actors. They're looking at a world through a certain filter that doesn't necessarily depict reality as what it is. Keep in mind, when they went into Russia in the first time, they said Russia's a gas can masquerading as a country. They said we're going to degrade the Russian military and we're going to destroy the Russian economy. None of that happened. The Russian economy has moved up to number 4 in the world in regards to its strength.
And when you guys had me on, I think when this first started, I said, mark my words, the ruble will actually prosper.
It shut up. It shut up. And if you're looking at the Russian military, Jesus, I mean, they went from 150,000 men to like nearly 1 million, outpacing the West in regards to the armaments that they're building.
It's also like history. It's also what I think a lot of people don't know is this is how Russia fights its wars.
Right.
I'm trying to think of an episode in Russian history where the first year went well. Ever. I can't think of one.
Yeah.
Ever. It's not their way. Their way has always been. I mean, look at what happened. What was it? September 1st, 1941. You know, Hitler invades.
Right.
I mean, part of their problem was their success. The tanks. They overran the front so easy that the logistics of just getting gas to the tanks, food to the troops, just disintegrated because it starts to grow exponentially as you radiate out of your supply bases. This is just classic logistics. And Russia that's always been their defense. Just like Great Britain, their defense has always been the Channel. You know? It's always saved them, and Russia has always been able to take huge losses in the beginning, and they rally at the end. That has been every single war that Russia, regardless of their government, has had. That is a fitting adaptation of that, and it's a perfect descriptor of how Russia fights wars. They are very good at attrition. They know how to do it very well. And and nobody, to be honest, has really done it better. And they have a way of breaking out at the right time. When you guys had me on, when this thing first started, I said, okay, I said, as soon as I get off this show, I'm going to go buy rubles, and then I also said, this war will end poorly for Ukraine. The smartest thing that people could do. I don't think Russia wants Ukraine. I think Russia is tired of being told NATO's not expanding eastward. And so they don't believe us anymore because we just kept lying to them. So they have made a decision. It would be like if the Chinese took California. We're not going to allow that. You know what I mean?
Or even Mexico. Right. I mean, my analogy is Mexico. If you knock over the government of Mexico and you put in intelligence, you put in military, you build up a massive military, you put in power people who hate the United States, the U.S. wouldn't tolerate that. I mean, there's nothing in me that believes the U.S. will say, well, Mexico is a sovereign state. They can do whatever they want. If they want to point missiles at us, they can do that. If they want to point their propaganda at us, they can do that. The U.S. would lose its mind. It would lose its mind.
And maybe rightly so, because it is a rational thing to be afraid of neighbors who in the past have not been friendly to you. I think that's a reasonable thing to say. So, just like, people always used to say, why did Saddam Hussein not just let people come in there? Because, Scott Ritter has a great answer to that. Because for Saddam Hussein, Iran believing he had weapons of mass destruction was an existential piece of information that he could not surrender. Well, let's flash forward to today. True or false? The United States can leave Ukraine right now.
They can do it right now in a heartbeat.
We can leave it right now, and it costs us. Let's say it costs us a little bit of. We'll come up with some word. Let's say it costs us in terms of the utility with respect to international prestige. We tucked tail and ran, but it's a minor expense on us. It's a minor cost for Putin. This is do or die. It's existential. He either wins the game we've set up for him,
Right.
or he loses everything. We've not gained. The whole purpose of game theory is to give your opponent a way out, even if you win.
But see, that's
And
the
if
rub,
you don't
Mark.
win, you give yourself a way out.
That's the rub, though. If for them, it is also existential because there's an element that
Yes.
Creates a perturbation in just rational analysis. And that's this notion that we must maintain leadership of the world. Even in that clip, that guy says something to the effect about the nuclear wars. He's like, well, if we can retain dominance over the globe, then, fair game on some level. Like in their minds, losing in Ukraine is effectively saying, okay, well, what's the point of NATO? Or for that matter, even, do we still maintain control over this physical matter reality and our capability of doing things on the ground, whether economically or financially or militarily? And they staked it all of that in Ukraine. I don't think they look at that as a minor thing. I mean, even when you hear Keir Starmer talk about it, he's like, it's very dangerous if we don't do this. It's like against the world. Like that's what you're like staking that against.
What's really dangerous? See, I don't think the next world war is going to start because the United States or Russia decides to take advantage of a first strike opportunity. I think it's going to be accidental. I think the operational tempo of the commanders gets ratcheted up. DEFCON 3 to DEFCON 2, things get marshaled. Somebody gets a little trigger happy and things escalate. It's almost World War I-ish to me right now. That war started through some dominoes fell, and it just knocked the whole house of cards down.
That is a very weird start to a war.
And this is how that can happen. I don't see that either side really wants to do it. I just think that there are voices. You call them neocons, call them whatever you want to call them, but there's voices in this current administration that seem to think that they're so confident Putin is bluffing. They're so nearly 100% confident Putin is bluffing. They're willing to risk what we call the black swan outcome, meaning low probability but high impact. Yes, it's a low probability that we're going to go and engage in nuclear war with Russia.
Right.
But if we do, and this is where the statistics break down, it's not a bell curve anymore. It's a highly skewed distribution. So now we have a low probability but high impact event that isn't just something that's going to cost $1 trillion to the world or something. This is going to set back civilization itself.
Yes.
Centuries if it happens. And it also sets a precedent. Now the nuclear war is no longer taboo.
Right.
And this is part of what I hate about it. It's the talking about it. It's the nonchalant attitude just around the probabilities of all this that's making me crazy.
Well, this is the clip of the guy that we were talking about. There we are. Yeah, this is the clip of the guy we're talking about. This is Admiral. I think he's a rear admiral. Listen to how casually he's talking about the end of the world. I mean, because the reality of it is, you're right. I mean, like, God did not proclaim that Ukraine needs to be in the Western sphere of influence, nor did God proclaim that the West needs to manage and control the world. It didn't function that way. I mean, it's like it's a fight for supremacy of sorts. And like this notion of like, I'm going to take my ball and go home, and take my ball and go home is basically the end of the world. It's just outrageous. Like, for one, the start of this conflict is a catastrophe that didn't need to happen. And so it's like the fact that we've ratcheted up to this level for something that literally didn't need to happen and that they fundamentally lied about all the way through is mind-blowing to me. This is the Rear Admiral talking about nuclear war.
Talk about non-nuclear and nuclear capabilities. We certainly don't want to have an exchange, right? I think everybody would agree. If we have to have an exchange, then we want to do it in terms that are most acceptable to the United States. So it's terms that are that are most acceptable to the United States that puts us in a position to continue to lead the world.
It is mind-blowing to me. That statement, every time I listen to that statement, it blows me away. We need to do things that are in line with the U.S. continuing to lead the world. And he is talking about nuclear war. It's just astonishing.
And it's the nonchalant way he says it. He goes, well, of course, we don't want to have an exchange, but if we have to have one, we're ready. Well, we don't have to have one.
Right.
Because I'll bet you $100 against a nickel right now that if you go randomly select 1,000 Americans, I doubt even 50 of them can point to where Ukraine is.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I would bet that. So Ukraine for us is a minor excursion. We're playing around, doing some neocon games, and we're playing around. For Russia, this is like the bully when you were in grade school.
Yeah.
You know, he takes your lunch money one day, and then the next day it's a little bit more and a little bit more, and finally you have to fight him just to get him off your back.
Right.
And this is what NATO has been. They've been a bully. We squandered so much human capital that would have made the world better in 1990. We sent the worst of our economists over there, and like trained parrots, it was deregulate, do this, do that. Forget that there was no infrastructure whatsoever inside the country to have anything even resembling what we would call good capitalism.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was what they got was the worst of capitalism, which was its corruption, its cronyism, you know, its exploitation. And so it's not an accident. Putin could have had a heart attack 40 years ago. There would have been somebody else that would have taken that over, because that's what happens when you shame people for decades and decades and decades. And I've been to Russia, and I don't mean the tourist traps. I've been all over. Back when I took that, ground transportation only from London to Singapore, spent a lot of time in Russia. And I don't mean politics. Russians in general are conservative people. They're family-oriented people. They're also Christian people. And you can't overstate that. They see some of what's going on in the West, and they find that to be decadent.
Right.
Now, I might disagree with them. With my libertarianish roots, I might say, well, I think you're wrong on this and you're wrong on that, and we should have separation of church and state and all that kind of stuff. But that's a very American notion. They don't look at it that way. And they're actually kind of like Americans. They're very patriotic.
Yeah.
They can criticize their country, but they don't really want to see foreigners doing it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And Americans are a lot like that too, I think, in many ways. So I'm not a very neurotic person at all. I have my faults, but that's not one of them. But I'm pretty neurotic over what's going on in Ukraine right now.
Same here.
And if I don't have to like the Biden administration, but I'm worried. I don't even know who's in charge. Do you know? Do we know who's actually calling the shots right now of the Biden administration? Because Biden just doesn't fill me with this thought that he's cogent and he's making rational decisions.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Because it's super weird. If you remember, Putin a couple of days ago came out, addressed the nation and the world. And he explained what was going on. He explained why he released the Oreshnik. He explained what was going to happen if this keeps going. Meaning, he went to his public and he explained what was going on to the public from the point of view of the state. Yes. All right. Joe Biden gave the permission to change his order to allow Ukraine to fire into Russia without saying anything to the American public. Kamala Harris didn't say anything to the American public. And we found out about it kind of like in a half-assed backwards way, with Zelensky popping his chest out saying, our missiles will speak for itself. Biden and the White House did not even confirm up until I think like yesterday that they allowed Ukraine to even do that. And so he's been fundamentally invisible. The only time he's come out is about the peace deal. So we know he's aware, he's there.
Yes.
But whether he's in charge, I have no clue. And there's another question that I have with this. Where is Trump? Like, you have all of these people who are representing Donald Trump, who Donald Trump picked to go into government and everything else. And they have been making statements either in the past or recently about Putin being a thug, about attacking Russia, about bombing strikes, like just out there stuff. And when you get somebody who's supposed to be Trump's pick saying stuff like that, and you see the White House escalating, and Donald Trump is sitting at SpaceX watching a rocket go up, you're like, okay, what the hell is going on? Donald Trump literally got elected by saying he wants to bring the war to a close. Reason why Biden is doing this now is because in their mind, Trump is going to bring the war to a close, and this $300 billion grift is going to go up in smoke. So we need to do everything in our power now to escalate in order to potentially make the situation untenable for Trump when he gets in.
And that certainly looks like what they're doing. It looks.
Yeah, but Trump
if
hasn't
that's
said
true,
anything.
That's to me, that's treason.
Look,
it's basically saying we're so butthurt over the election.
Yeah.
We're going to risk thermonuclear exchanges between the two largest owners of these weapons so we can stick it to Trump.
Yeah.
That's what's being.
It's outrageous.
That's how I'm interpreting your words. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's outrageous. I mean, they literally lost an election, and they lost it. This point was litigated. Like, if you remember when Kamala Harris was like, oh, he's hanging around with dictators and he's talking to Kim Jong-un and everything else. If you ask the public, who do you trust on foreign policy? It ended up being Trump in spades by like 15 points.
Absolutely.
And so it's like he got elected in making speeches about bringing down hostilities, bringing down conflict. We're at the brink of war, etc. And then he gets elected. Joe Biden escalates. You get France and the UK saying, yeah, screw it. Let's throw missiles into Russia. You get Russia launching that terrifying weapon. And Trump is invisible. He doesn't say a word. Like, you would think that he would put on Twitter, Joe Biden, on the cricket, Joe Biden is escalating in order to make it difficult for me when I get into office. He is ignoring the will of the American public, blah, 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 blah. Whatever he wants to write at 3 a.m. He writes it on everything else. Why not this? Is it possible?
Well, as I wrote you, if I was Trump's advisor, I know what they're doing. They're trying to show respect. They won, a gracious winner.
Who do you mean Trump is?
Trump's doing Trump 2.0.
When is Trump
trying to moderate?
When has Trump cared about?
I know. I'm just telling you what my hunch is. What I think he ought to do is exactly what you said. Come out on Twitter, and I think he ought to at least imply that any general that goes along with this nonsense will not be received well in his administration. Right. That will shut the whole thing down. There's a limit to what he can do because he's not the president. But also, from the game theory perspective, he might, he's accused, just like you and I are, of being Russian assets sometimes because he thinks rationally. I don't care one lick about Putin. I don't care. Putin is not in my world. What I care about Putin is he is the president of the second largest holder of really bad weapons in the entire world. Yeah. And he can make my life miserable. And part of the reason this war has a possibility that the probability of this has increased is in part because of what I consider just arrogant actions by the United States and NATO when it came to the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
Yes, we won.
We were not as gracious as we could have been, and we sent our worst over there, and we have been bad actors from their perspective. There is no cleaning that up. Now, if there's war, I clearly am in favor of my side winning. Yeah. But I don't know how, going back to the game theory thing, I'm not going to call it a win if we get our way and we've lost 40, 50 million people.
Agreed.
That's not a win. Yeah, yes, we won the war. Great. We won the war, and the price tag was 50 million people and 4 cities.
The military was trying to get Lincoln to do that. Like when they went to Lincoln, they was like, well, they'll take the East Coast, but we'll be able to destroy all of the Soviet Union.
I know. It's almost like out of Dr. Strangelove. It is. It's kind of like the crazy,
And Lincoln was like, you guys are out of your minds. And he was looking for another way out. And my fear is that level or that capability of telling the military no doesn't exist in the White House. If anything, it's the military telling them no. Like the military was against these strikes. That was one of the things that calmed Biden down. If you remember when Keir Starmer came to the White House, I think it was a few months ago, and they were announcing in the media, Joe Biden is going to approve strikes into Russia. Joe Biden is going to approve strikes into Russia. The Pentagon told Joe Biden, this is a bad idea. Yes. If Russia gives a missile to the Houthis, we have 800 military bases around the world. If you end up with a larger weapon in the hands of one of these groups, we are vulnerable. Don't do this. And Joe Biden gets into a pissing match with one of the reporters screaming at the guy because he was all, keyed up, and he didn't go through with it. He basically recalled or didn't necessarily go through with it. The media was almost like pushing him on this issue. And now to reverse, it's just astonishing. It seems, look, I agree with your take that they are looking at this. I guess from my point of view, there is an ideological permutation in their rationality that is making them not see this clearly, or at the very least not being honest to the public about it in a clear sense. Like the notion that one of the guys, Bauer, I believe, one of the military generals, he says, well, Russia's weaker today than it was back then. How the hell do you get that? Where do you get that assessment from, that they went from 150,000 military that couldn't hold on to the areas of Ukraine that they took to nearly 1 million men with hundreds of thousands registering per day because you're effectively attacking their country? Where the hell do you get this idea that they're weaker? That it's an ideological permutation in regards to the way they think that screws up their take of reality. It's just,
and it reminds me of McNamara in Vietnam. There was another person that said, as long as we kill 10 times more than they kill of us, we're winning. Well,
I literally wrote
because it
McNamara's
was
name down.
existential for them. For us, we could just pack up and leave.
Yeah.
And people don't seem to get that. If you paint somebody's back against the wall,
they have nowhere else to go.
It becomes do or die for them. It's not do or die for us. And it's just utterly ridiculous. And I agree with what you just said. And I think great evidence for it is the freak out on one of Donald Trump's appointments. And I'll give people a hint. It's not Gates.
Gabbard.
It's Tulsi. It's our girl Tulsi.
Who they call the Russian asset.
Freaked people out because they know she's going to be loyal and she's going to take, that position she's been nominated for is the gatekeeper of information as it gets to the president.
Yes, DNI.
So, who knows what Biden doesn't even know, because, people in the deep state didn't even take him the knowledge of it, and Tulsi's not going to do that. And everybody, at least on the left, seems to be completely freaked out by this appointment.
They are. Yeah, they are. Because
and I mean terrified by it. It's like they're going to lose their livelihood over it or something.
They don't trust her. It's funny. I wrote down McNamara. McNamara has this line in, I can't think of the name of the thing, but it was called "Rationality is not always rational." And what he was pointing to was that requires something over top of rationality in order to make it work. Now, I disagree with him. I think rationality is rational. Mm-hmm. I think the issue is when there are permutations to the rationality, when there's something infecting.
It's just not necessarily moral. Rationality isn't moral.
That's true.
I mean, a child molester to a child molester that gets utility out of abusing a helpless child.
Right.
It's rational for that person to abuse a child because that's what gets them off.
But there's no morality to rationality. There's no morality to intelligence. Agreed. 1,000% agreed. But I think what he's trying to get across is that people can take a framing of the words, kind of what you said, bad premises. And if you are working through the logic of a bad premise, you're going to come to horrible ends as you work through the logic. It was rational in the context to which you were operating. And his point is there needs to be something above that. That can't just be this kind of narrow tunnel vision of rationality where you're taking one step after the next that seems perfectly rational to you, but leads to this kind of escalatory spiral of oblivion. And he was like, this doesn't work. There has to be something else. I was fascinated with McNamara. because he had a come to Jesus moment big time with the Vietnam War. And he had seen bits of the Second World War and the Korean War also. And that phone call when Nixon contacted him and not Nixon, LBJ.
Yes.
Got into his ass in that phone call, effectively saying, we're not going to stop this war. We're going to ramp up this war. You're having these mental fits. This isn't going to fly. I mean, just fascinating stuff. Mark, before I let you go, because we have about 10 minutes, I want to get into the tariff war that Trump is trying to create. So one of the things that they were saying that Donald Trump was going to do was lay tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China. And I forget the exact number. I think it was like 15% or 10% or something like that. But just right off the bat. Now, he's making this argument saying, we are doing this to Mexico because of the drugs and guns that come into America. Scheinbaum pointed out the majority of those guns are being bought by Americans and trafficked. They come from you.
Yes.
So it's like you are the world's supply of that. And the people who buy those drugs are coming from you. Meaning we only have drug labs because you have people who want drugs. She's not wrong on that. She also makes the point, like, if a portion of the money that you spend on defense was used to help build up these nations, that you would not have to worry about immigration into America. That's the other dirty little secret. We've helped overthrow those countries and created basket cases. Not all of us. I mean, we're not all to blame. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But we didn't necessarily do them any favors. I can give you an example. Hernandez, the one that was in not Bolivia, Honduras. And we got rid of the president Zelaya. We put in Hernandez. And several years later, he ends up being extradited to the United States for being a drug lord, saying he wants to get cocaine into the nose of every gringo. It's like, and then Hillary Clinton wrote about it in her book saying it wasn't a coup. We just took him out in his pajamas. The military just escorted the guy out in his pajamas.
But it wasn't a coup.
So I guess my question to you is,
coups are those things other countries do.
Right, we don't do that. Unless you talk to John Bolton and start laughing when you bring up coups. What is that going to do? I mean, is Trump, look, I guess there's another hypothesis that could be going on that I don't entirely entertain because I don't necessarily think it's true. But there's this other idea that Trump could be escalating to de-escalate. That Trump has all of these creatures, these just lunatics that he brought into his campaign that is Israel first, or for that matter, that is for the war, like even Marco Rubio, and in a way of a threat. Like, for example, even the phone call where they said Trump had a phone call with Putin and he threatened him with the European military, which is kind of a punchline. And the phone call didn't happen. But whether it happened or not, it got to Russia, meaning that might have been the target message that he wanted to get to Putin without having the conversation with Putin, knowing full well that it would be repeated in the media there as a veiled threat.
Sure.
And so it could be that these lunatics are there as his way of escalating with the idea that, look, man, I have a government of lunatics. Don't mess with us, but let's make a deal anyway. I don't know. I don't necessarily entertain that. What do you think about that, though? I mean, he did.
I don't know that I entertain it, but I don't necessarily reject it either, because I think it's at least partially true. Because let's be honest, we're talking game theory today. Part of game theory is bluffing, knowing when to call, when to fold, knowing how to rattle sabers without it looking like you're just rattling sabers.
Right.
And so it seems to me that the Trump effect, that some folks have written about, has already taken charge. Mexico just announced they're going to stop the caravans because they don't want to piss Trump off. Whether you hate Trump or like him, I think the foreign leadership respected him. I do not think they respected Biden. I think that's almost obvious to any objective observer. And that's not whether you like Biden or Trump. It doesn't matter whether you like any of them. I think that's fairly accurate thing to say.
He shouldn't have ran. I mean, like when he goes abroad, and it took what is her name? The one from Italy. It's on the tip of my tongue. She's Baloney. And Joe Biden was wandering into the wilderness. Do you remember this? Like, he didn't know where to go.
Yes, he didn't know where to go or what to say,
had to take
or where
his hand and lead him to a different place. And I was like, that's so humiliating. I mean, like, it's a woman. She's very attractive. I know that has nothing to do with it. She's just attractive. But the idea that she had this,
It
there's a
always
level
has
of
something to do with it.
yeah, there's a level of femininity
Yeah.
associated with women that men, it would be difficult to replicate. And
Right.
it was kind of that, this kind of very tender, precious, okay, he's not in his right mind. Let me help him out. It was kind of that.
Right.
That's humiliating for president. And then Yahoo treats him, horribly and humiliates him at every opportunity. No, I don't think he was respected.
And
I
then
think
let's
Trump,
go back in time. I forgot when it was. You follow these things more in detail than I do, but I think it was right after Trump got elected the first time. And there was some G7 meeting or something, and Trump just mooses his way in there right into the front. I mean, he just like the 800-pound gorilla. You remember what I'm talking about? He just plows his way in there. And now at the time we're like, well, that's not very presidential, but other leaders respect that. He's, I work with cats a lot. I run the Humane Society here. And so we work with cats and dogs. You got alpha cats, alpha dogs, and you can just see how they behave.
Yeah.
And Trump has decided, okay, when I'm at these meetings, I'm the alpha dog. And he acts like it, and they treat him like that. And people tend to respect that, especially when you're talking about leadership. Nobody wants a leader that says, well, I'm not really sure. Maybe if we try hard and we sacrifice, we can dig ourselves out of this. But it's really not my fault anyway. It's somebody else's fault. And so I think the Trump effect is helping here. I do think that they're playing chess. I don't think they're playing checkers. I think Trump knows exactly what he wants to get done. I do believe that Trump is not an ideologue that I've been able to tell. Trump is a practical, pragmatic type of person. He has ideologues around him, intellectuals around him that can kind of fill him in on the issues. But I think Trump sees that war with Russia, or even institutional animosity with Russia, is a loser's game.
He says as much. I mean, he even talked about the sanctions, saying
so I feel good about that. As far as the tariffs go, I think right now it's just saber rattling. He's using tariffs as a way to get certain world leaders in line that have made it clear they don't like him. Like what's the guy's name in Trudeau in Canada?
But doesn't that damage America though? I mean, like if you think about it, like
it damages a lot less than nuclear war.
Well, it does, agreed. But we have trade deals with Canada and Mexico. I mean, hell, when Donald Trump came in, if you remember, he redid NAFTA. I forget the name that he called it, the American Pact or the American
whatever.
Yeah, whatever he called it. But he redid it. How, like, tariffs doesn't breach any kind of guideline within the context of the trade pact? It's just super weird to me that he's using this as a weapon while simultaneously saying something like, hey, we understand that there's a problem of people not wanting to use the dollar because it's a liability in the way that we've used it as a weapon. So we'll just use tariffs instead. It's like, okay, dude. It's like, it didn't really, like, I don't know. It just seems whacked out to me. I mean, but correct me if I'm wrong on this. For one, it's going to increase the prices on Americans for everyday goods that they get if he goes through with his plan for tariffs like this. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think he's going to go through with it. I think he's using it as a
paper rattle.
As a threat, because it is possible to raise money with tariffs, but you have to set tariffs on goods that are price inelastic, meaning Americans are going to import them whether they do or not. The negative of tariffs is that ironically, it actually is a windfall for the people whose goods that you've put the tariff on, to the extent that Americans are still going to buy them anyway. So let's use an example. Let's say that we import insulin.
Okay.
And so you either buy it, so that's perfectly inelastic, vertical demand curve. You're going to pay right up to your income, to your wealth, so you can get your insulin, or you die. Well, that's the sort of good that you would want to, if your goal is tax revenue, you would want to tax something like that because people are going to buy it anyway. But it's 100% of the consumer surplus goes directly to the seller, which is a foreigner.
Right.
Now, I'm generally against tariffs as a way of managing, as a way of raising income, because it is a tax. A tariff is a tax. I'm also tend to not like them just because they're not very efficient.
Right.
And it is true, if you do the modeling, that global trade enhances, free trade enhances everyone, not just the United States. If we trade with Indonesia, yes, maybe they start making TVs and we don't make them anymore. But now we have resources that we can plow into more productive things for an advanced economy versus a non-advanced economy, blah, blah, blah. But here's the kicker. Nobody believes in free trade. Not one person on this planet believes in free trade. Not even one. They believe in conditional free trade. Yeah. Great Britain started the free trade thing, and they didn't believe in it either. They believed in free trade for their manufactured goods.
Right.
They didn't believe in free trade for food that competed with their own farmers. So nobody believes in free trade. It's all a bunch of BS. Nobody actually is sincere, because think about it. A free trade agreement could be written on a napkin.
Yeah.
Hitherto there shall be no restrictions whatsoever on anything mercantile between the citizens of Great Britain and the citizens of the United States. There's no tariffs, there's no taxes.
Yeah.
If there's no protections, and every country protects particular industries that they have decided are strategic for them. There's even something called export-led growth. Japan got rich over it. Korea, some people talk about the Korean miracle. Well, they did it through tariffs and export-led growth. South Korea said as a policy, South Koreans will subsidize the electronics purchases of Americans, and the next generation will thank us. It's a long-term thinking as opposed to short-term utility. And so tariffs are a bad thing. Tariffs stifle free trade. But John Maynard Keynes has his famous, statement, in the long run, we're all dead. So it is true. Global free trade helps everyone. But if it's not really free trade, in the long run, we're all dead, meaning that we're not going to have an automobile industry. We're not going to have steel factories anymore. We're just going to have a bunch of people that work at McDonald's and that apparently get rich working on Kamala Harris's campaign. And by the way, I can't leave without complimenting you. I watched the episode of you on Joy Reid.
Oh, thank you.
And it did two things. At first, I laughed because your impression was just spot on. And then later I felt guilty. I'm like, because you actually took a, hey man, maybe this lady's mentally ill,
right,
or something. And I started feeling guilty. I'm like, you know what? I'm being an asshole because I'm sticking it in her more because I can't stand her. She represents everything in journalism I can't stand. Her and Scarborough, whatever his name is, all those people. It's as bad as Fox and Friends to me. I can't watch that stuff. And
we're gonna have to close it on this. Let's come to the hour, man. Thank you for this. I've appreciated your analysis, especially going into the game theory of all this. Sure. It's astonishing. I agree with you. Mark Frost. He's an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine capitalist, Schumpeterian, and recovering libertarian. You can follow Mark at Frosty Cash. Man, thank you for this. I really appreciated it.
Okay, you have a good one.
You too.